And there you go. So that was our conversation with Brady Corbett. Lovely guy.
Nice,
Clearly has just been soaking up all of the different things to do with his film. Great to ask him about VistaVision and cameras. I really particularly liked his comment, which is said by a lot of filmmakers, but you really felt that to be true of this, which is that when you shoot on film and when you shoot on a film stock that is precious and limited, it means that everybody else really switches on. And I think I could always see that in the film. And this film was made for like less than $10 million, which blows my mind. I can't remember reviewing a film that's cost less than that.
We've probably...
Outside of horror, like maybe some small horror.
I think we've probably done some small indies that have been like that. But like,
when you see that
for a film that
how
looks
much
this good...
shot on film over such a like long run time, it did sort of like surprise me that it didn't have like maybe like a 5 times.
Also for the price of the talent as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, they must be doing it for the love of the game. Yeah, literally. But just to refresh us, that we're going to be talking about The Brutalist. Brady Corbett co-wrote this with his wife, Mona Fastvold. It's a period drama set in the 1940s, just after the Second World War. Follows the story of Laszlo Toth, who is a Hungarian Jewish architect who we pick up with him just after he has survived the Holocaust, approaching New York City as an immigrant. We're greeted with this inverted, warped perspective of the Statue of Liberty from like the back side of it. It's quite interesting. We're not then treated to the obvious wide scape of New York in the 1940s. It's very boots on the ground from there. We don't. It sort of holds his perspective in a way. It's confusing and strange. There's engine noise, and then we're straight into it.
And it's like, instead of getting the wide shot of New York, as you say, the guy said, we're given a room full of immigrant faces in Ellis Island,
processing,
waiting
Ellis
to be processed,
Island, coming through, translators and documents and writing your name down. Ellis Island's a really fascinating place to go if you haven't. Have you been to that?
I typed in, did you do your name?
Yeah, I did the name,
really interesting. That's
really
when I realised that my, tangent here, that my surname is probably perhaps a corruption of a different name.
Yeah.
Do you think? Because I only found 6 of Pundex. But
we have Briefles and Briffles and Brifles spelt it all different ways with different numbers of Fs and Is and Es taken a different place, and it would have been something different to sound more German and less Jewish back in the day. So it's hard. It gets harder to trace it. Then you can like, are those Briffles us? We don't know. So it's kind of complicated. But Laszlo lands in America and he reconnects with an old friend of his who runs a furniture shop called Miller and Sons. And this is sort of his immigrant story of like, his last name isn't Miller. He has just chosen the name so that the American punters will,
what does he say? Like,
him more.
Who's Miller? I'm Miller.
Miller and Sons. It's a long-running business. And they are approached by the son of Harrison Van Buren. Joe Alwyn plays Harry Van Buren, who approaches this company and says, listen, while my father is away, I'd like you to come to our estate, an enormous, wealthy estate, and refurbish my father's library. I think it would be a lovely birthday present for him. And in this, of course, they accept the job and they start quoting the materials. And in the process of doing this, not only do they refurbish the library, but they create something distinct and artistic and grand and minimalist, and it uses natural light, and it's sort of like a hint at brutalist architecture. Harrison Van Buren, played by the wonderful Guy Pearce, storms through the door and screams, what the hell in God's name is going on here? There's also this element that you've got non-English speaking immigrants working in his very prestigious house, does not understand what's just been created, kicks them out the door, refuses to pay, and they sort of unfortunately depart the estate with very bad feelings. Harrison then catches up with our character Laszlo Toth, who he realizes is an esteemed brutalist architect in his hometown of Hungary, brings him photos of some of the great synagogues, libraries, and community centers that he has built, and decides to bring him into his house, introduce him to very wealthy friends, and there's this clashing of cultures between wealth and poor immigrant, and also this intersection of collecting an artistic Holocaust survivor, almost like a party entertaining thing. And there are complex relationships between wealth and those dynamics. But he announces to a dinner party, I have a plan. I would like to build on the hill, on the back garden of my estate, a massive building. I want it to be a chapel. I want it to be a library. It's going to be this grand artistic vision. And I would like you, Laszlo Toth, to be the chief architect of my construction. We then see the film fold on from here with complications rising to the production itself. We have commentaries on the relation of the way in which art is made, the relationship to creativity and capitalism. Is also about Zionism and immigration and also architecture. It is a big sweeping odyssey taking place over many years. It's got a 215-minute runtime, and it's in 2 halves with an interval. That is probably all you need to know about The Brutalist going into it. The name Brutalist refers to brutalist architecture, which, George?
Yeah, so Brutalism was a movement of architecture that came in post-war. And just to clarify, it's got nothing to do with brutality.
No.
It is actually a slight misnomer and actually maybe even a pejorative put onto brutalism for those who didn't like it. Brutalism, the word...
It refers to a brutality of history, but it's not itself.
Actually, it comes from the word béton brut, which means raw
cement.
Concrete in French. That's simply where it comes from. But I agree. It is a type of... They were structures that were, first of all, concrete post-war, incredibly cheap. But solid. It was simple but grand in its statement. It's also worth mentioning that we discovered that Laszlo was a student of Bauhaus. Just a little bit of design stuff.
Please.
In the interwar period, Bauhaus was a German art school that put forward this, led by this guy called Walter Gropius, who put forward this idea about design with reference to architecture that was heavily emphasized on functionalism and practicality, but also melding that with artistic vision. And you have a movement that kind of followed on from the Bauhaus school that was all about simplicity, functionalism, clean lines. Brutalism bounces off from that, and you kind of get a period of brutalism from 50s to 60s. But he is brutalist architect, and there's a moment in the film where he talks about why concrete is a really important material.
George's architecture career is retired but not forgotten.
Not retired but not forgotten. Still there. Still on the way. It was on the subs bench going, put me in, coach!
Put me in! When I was watching with you, I could just feel you vibrating.
Well, what actually was quite refreshing is that I was, in the same way that, we've talked before about when there are legal dramas and we watch it with Talia or Anna, and they go, no. Yeah. But I will say that when the way the architects in this film talk about architecture is correct.
Yeah, it checks
architecture
out.
language and correct terminology, and I was like, that's
so you and I have talked about this film
Yes.
for a few weeks, and if you follow us on Patreon especially, and you've listened to the show, we've been subtly hinting about our excitement to talk about the film. So George, now we are a few weeks on from seeing it, and we're talking about today. How did you get on with The Brutalist?
Well, yes. I mean, first of all, what I want to kind of get out of the way.
Sirens on our end.
Sirens on our end. If you can hear it first, I can actually see it. It's an ambulance.
Look at that.
One thing I want to get out of the way before we begin our discussion, because it is going to get away, is this issue of the runtime that has kind of been tagged onto any single discussion about the film. The runtime is the runtime. It's 2 hours 15. It is 3.5 hours long. And yes, before
3 hours 15. Oh, so 215 minutes.
215 minutes, 3.5 hours long. And yes, that is very daunting. However, two things. One, it has an intermission, as you mentioned, a 15-minute intermission, which makes it just like going to the theatre, a first act and a second act. And you know what? That makes all the difference. Secondly, it is actually very pacey. You and I said that we have seen slower
shorter
2-hour films. Yeah. It is not. I personally did not feel it to be a slog. When I came out of it, I did not feel like I just slogged through a 3.5-hour movie.
No. Yeah, I agree.
Even the Killers of the Flower Moon didn't have an intermission. So just want to put that out of the way and decide that, yes, The Brutalist is really interesting. Really, really interesting. It is a massive, big, monumental, grand movie that comes together like a building being built before your very eyes. In a way, I think you and I were kind of talking off air, that it is one of those films that you're seeing it being constructed and it's only almost in its completion that, like a building, you can step back and go, oh, I can kind of see what that is now. And I look forward to, even though it's 3 hours and 30 minutes, I look forward to diving back into the layers and picking out elements to it. I think there are times when I think it's a little too aware of its own grandness and slightly overstates its grandness a little bit. And I just wish it could pull it back. However, what you've actually got in there is really interesting stuff. As you say, shot fantastically, just gorgeous to look at, and a really engaging but uncomfortable look at the American dream. You have this very uncomfortable relationship between Adrian Brody's character and Guy Pearce's character, between employer and employee, between master and servant, essentially. And that is charming, but uncomfortable. And then you also have the relationship between Adrian Brody and Erzsébet, his wife, played by Felicity Jones, who brings with her literal and metaphorical baggage from the Holocaust, and also his niece Zsofia. And there are the ghosts of the past lingering around. It reminded me, if you were to draw comparisons to any other films, it has the kind of ominous building towards a project and tension between people of There Will Be Blood. Yeah. But I think it also has the very cold relationship between employer and employee as something like Foxcatcher, actually. It was a concept of working on a grand stake. And there's also this idea about, with immigration, it's that, Laszlo is a new immigrant to America, which is an immigrant nation. Let's not forget. America was, obviously, there were, pre-existing people in America, but
especially post-1945.
But post-1945, the history of America is one of immigration.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you have Van Buren. Van Buren itself, a Dutch name, would have originally been, but it's now become old money. And Guy Pearce's and Adrien Brody's view on their characters' view on what America should be is really interesting. Great performances. Adrien Brody in the whole film, basically every single scene, basically, really carries it in a way that we always know he could. Anyone who's seen The Pianist knows he's a fantastic actor. It's great to see him get probably the best role he's had since then. I think even he's admitted that. I think it's Guy Pearce's best performance. Fantastic. Really, I was saying that in the same way that with Wicked, it's like that is Cynthia Erivo's movie, but Ariana Grande is great. It's like The Brutalist is Ariana Brody. It is Adrien Brody's movie.
I just spliced them together in my head and it was horrifying.
Defying concrete. But it's also Guy Pearce being fantastic, and also Felicity Jones as well. And I noticed very early on that it's a huge film, but you and I were locked in, really engaging with it, and I was really beguiled by it. I think it's big and it's grand, and I look forward to sinking my teeth into it more. My tiniest little part of my brain thinks it might think itself to be a little bit grander than it actually is, a little bit deeper than it kind of states itself to be. But I'm sure on second viewing I'd get more out of it. But I was really impressed by it.
Yeah, I totally agree and echo what you said. I knew this was a special film. Yes, watching it, but when we left the cinema, you and I tend to, if we can, hold our thoughts to each other because we don't want to use them up. But we had this thing where we were gonna hold it for a few weeks. The film has an epilogue which strikes a really interesting tone. Which, as you said, as you get towards the end of the film, you start to frame the ideas of the film as a whole, as a completed piece of art, almost like a building itself. And it has such an interesting framing for its own storytelling. And we both couldn't help but try to unpack that together and start to unpack it because this film confidently tackles so many different things in a way that, yes, when you list them on paper might come across as very pretentious, and it is a little bit, but it's so well accomplished. It is so masterfully put together and such a fine story. Like I said in the opening, it's about immigration, Zionism, class, violence, creativity in art, finance, addiction, and also architecture. It's also one of the great films about architecture. Not that I've seen them all, but I would so happily hold this up as a wonderful piece of storytelling. I all the things you said about performance. I think Adrien Brody has this wonderful determination, but frailty. He always seems like he's just 2% body fat, and the wrong wind could come in and you'd knock him over, and he could have broken at any time.
Apparently, the costume designer actually picked clothing that highlighted his frame. That showed him to be a pencil of a man.
It really comes across, and he's got this very sort of thin, bony facial structure that really adds to that. The way this film looks is an absolute master. If you didn't know, it's shot on VistaVision, which I didn't. You and I had this thing walking out where it looked really distinct. It looked really striking. It had a really interesting effect. It was definitely large format, but I couldn't tell in what way it was. And it's this reclaimed film stock that was last used in the 1960s called VistaVision, which is like a large format film stock that allows you to use slightly closer lenses to capture a larger frame. So it basically increases your field of view without needing to punch in. And that allows, in the words of Brady Corbett, him to shoot faces and buildings all in the same frame and capture the magnitude of them. And even if he's not shooting buildings, he's shooting construction sites, and you're sort of up close with the magnitude of them, and then later the buildings themselves and the emotion. And it just looks gorgeous. The color grading of it, the present film stock, all of it was just such a pleasure to watch. So I think if you are into cinematography and you want to unpack something that looks like something really distinct and different, go and treat yourself to The Brutalist. It was like finishing a wonderful novel. It's a film that really winds into itself. First half very optimistic, as you said, about the American dream. There's so much hope and promise, and I think as an audience member I felt naive thinking about all of the hopeful things I thought in the first half. But the film, like a wonderful story, opens itself up and then folds and contorts back into itself in the most compelling way. I love what it has to say about the creation of art, how capitalism can create and destroy art at the same time, and the warnings about that. I think what it does as a film commenting on the Holocaust without ever showing it, I think is really brilliant and really restrained. And it could have, so we could, our characters have just left an incredibly significant event in their lives, but we're picking up in media res for them, I guess, after the fact. And they are talking occasionally about the horrors of what has happened. But I think it shows a lot of restraint that Brady Corbett never cut back and showed something to help inform the film he was telling. It always expressed in everywhere else, and it left us as audience members to fill in the blanks. And I thought it was so wonderfully done. And it is, in so many ways, one of the better films that comments on the Holocaust.
Yeah, I agree.
And the relationship between Europeans and Americans in that post-war era, American entrepreneurialism and naivety, and European depression, and the lack of what is said, and trying to process things. Anyone who has family members who are familiar, anyone who knows people who will and won't talk about the Holocaust, I think it actually nails that sentiment on the head. Yes, it is incredibly long, and it is hard to recommend to people to say take 4 hours essentially out of your day to go and see it. But I think it's a really rare, special gem of a film that should be savoured and earned its right to tell the story and cover so many things over such a long time. I think it's a very special film that's very brilliantly done.
And James and I, in doing this show now for over 3 years, we have learned, and I've come to appreciate the fact that ultimately, whatever film, just taking the Brutalist aside for a second, the best way to experience it is in the cinema. I know that's something that cineasts and cinema lovers say all the time, and it's become a bit of a cliche, but it is actually true. And a film like The Brutalist is a really good example of that, not just for the way it looks and for its grandness, but in a way, if you are going to see a 3.5 hour movie, it is better to see it in the cinema, where you are a captive audience, where you are restrained, you don't have your phone out, and you lock in because you need to lock in because you're going to be there for 3.5 hours to tell this epic story.
And I understand it's a huge privilege. Like, we don't have young kids. We're fairly like independent, young guys in our 30s. And I know some people will say, oh, well, it's a lot easier for me to watch that kind of film at home. And my argument is always, well, is it? I find it very hard to have 3+ hours, even 2 hours, let alone 3.5, of uninterrupted time at home, where my phone isn't popping off, someone's trying to call me with any WhatsApp group relating internet news, or like it sounds really bad, but like a family member walking in, food, this, like I don't really get 3.5 hours of uninterrupted time at home. Whereas the cinema experience it has intention. I've intentionally taken myself to go here, and I will see The Brutalist and come out.
The mistake that people fall into, I think, is thinking that their home environment is a controlled environment.
No.
I know where I am at home. No, the cinema is a controlled environment. That is actually what the cinema is providing you with. It's a dedicated space, a dedicated time, best picture quality, best sound quality. And there is a difference between being sat at home thinking, oh, I can just pause it now if I want to, because I can.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're sat in a cinema and you're sat even in the middle of a row,
the fact that it can't be paused.
It can't be paused. And if you have to get up, you're going to disrupt people. It's important. And the thing is about ease as well. Just remember that, like, the amount of time and effort that went into make a movie. And I feel like it's really very little to on your part as an audience member to go to the cinema. It's a tiny bit of effort that makes a huge amount of difference. Obviously, we still watch films at home, and like we totally understand why people do that. But it's just often when we see films like this that are so cinematic that we really encourage people to go see them.
And we talked before about how problematic it is for us to stand here and go, you have to see it in cinema, which is this limited time period when it will exist forever, most likely on the small screen. But that all the more doubles down on the fact that if it's worth seeing, and it's a special film that is covering all of these things, it's worth seeing it. Please just go and take yourself and have that experience. So I think Brady Corbett has spoken when he got the Golden Globes. He spoke about it and he said, it's a miracle this film could happen. We have to be able to allow filmmakers to tell the stories they want to tell. And sure, are all the films going to be as good as this that try to cover this much? Most likely not. No. But I think it's like, I'm really like treasuring this film as something special that should be savoured and sipped like a fine wine.
Absolutely.
So these types of films are really special. They don't come around.
No, exactly. And it is different, and it is bold, and it is engaging. Yeah. Also, I really didn't like his previous film, Vox Lux.
Right.
And I really didn't think it was really good at all.
Yeah.
So for this to even be marginally good was a real improvement. That was a big surprise to me.
I now want to go and check out Vox Lux and his other films.
You know what? Go see it.
We can report back.
I think it's a mess. I think it tries to get good ideas. I think this is a massive improvement. But, I mean, there's so much to dig into. The moments of when of like Guy Pearce meeting Felicity Jones's character for the first time, and the way he sort of tries to joke but ends up teasing Laszlo about his background. And
Felicity Jones, I think, is her best performance.
Yeah,
that
I think
can
so.
remember. She's very vulnerable and frail, but not at the expense of being like brave and determined. Like she has real moments of strength in this film, and that can be, especially for female characters in most films, that's a really hard line to toe. But I think she has some brilliant scenes in this.
And Joe Alwyn, terrifically slimy and punchable.
Yes.
You just wanted to punch him in the face.
Yeah.
And I loved it when you and I came out. We were really thinking about how the movie opens and how the movie ends, and what characters are actually significant. And you mentioned about the Holocaust. I agree. We were thinking like in many ways it's so much a film about the Holocaust, but it's not about the Holocaust. But it is about the Holocaust. But it's a shadow.
When you've watched a film that's forcing you to engage with architecture for 3+ hours and its meaning and its intention, the epilogue in particular, if you've seen it, its framing, its ending, and the way in which someone's art is going to be remembered in a really interesting and contrasting way. And that forced me to think, well, what is that trying to say? And I still don't really have a clear idea in my mind, but I'm constantly cycling through and wondering, and it's just food for thought.
I will say this as well. This isn't a spoiler. I'm going to dance around it, but I think it's worth flagging because I spoke to somebody else who had seen it, and I mentioned this, and they went, "Oh, thank you for clarifying that. It really confused me." In the epilogue, in the closing 10 minutes, there is a casting
black mark on this, I think.
A casting decision where a character is cast using an actor from earlier in the film in a different way that isn't explained enough, that is just a distraction.
Yeah.
And I'm like, we've just spent 3.5 hours with this movie. In the last 10 minutes, did you really need to make that why you didn't need to make that confusing? You felt the same way.
I picked up on it at the time and I was like, I'm not going to think about this too much, but I'm pretty sure that's happened.
So
it's
just
annoying.
basically, if you go and see it and there's something towards the end that you go, huh? Be like, just ignore it. It's this, but okay.
Hannah writes in to hello at Pulp Kitchen podcast, just like you can, about the Brutalist, and says, "Hello, James and George. Hope you're having a great January. We're both sick. Finally, we can talk about the Brutalist. What a film. It does an incredible job portraying the artist's conflicted personality. Probably going to be my favorite non-biopic biopic. Yeah, I should say it's fiction. It's not based on a true
it's
story.
like,
it felt like it could have been based on a true story.
It's a bit like Tar as well. It's not like a downfall like Tar, but it's like a fictional thing that could be real.
Totally. Among all its obvious strengths, it explores something I feel hasn't been talked about much in films like this: the artist's complex relationship with architecture as an art form. And isn't it ironic that Corbett's film came out of the same year as Francis Ford Coppola's Megalopolis? Brutalist is a healthier version of Megalopolis. Not that the two films need to be compared, but I think you know what I mean. The movie really captures how art, meant to carry light, enlightenment, also carries darkness and can irrevocably change its creator. Like all art, it doesn't truly belong to its maker. It can take on a life of its own, sometimes even consuming the artist. With architecture, this idea feels even more relevant. It exists in open, often public spaces, losing that sense of artistic preservation. Think of the controlled environment of a gallery and instead becomes part of the world, sometimes overshadowing the name of its creator. I caught myself thinking about the most famous modern architectural landmarks and realizing I had no idea who designed them. Anyway, I could go on about this forever, but I'll wrap things up with a bit of interesting, I hope, trivia. The Hungarian language you hear Adrian Brody and Felicity Jones speak in voiceovers wasn't actually spoken by them. It was done using AI, combining their voices with Hungarian voice actors. The company behind it is based in my home country, Ukraine. One of my friends works there, so I had a pleasure of listening to how it was actually done. Thanks so much for the pod. By the time I'm writing this, I haven't heard your thoughts on the film yet, but I'm really looking forward to them. All the best, Hannah. Hannah, thank you so much. Thank you for that.
I feel like they're kind of keeping that on the DL because I feel like people get funny about AI. But
yeah, it's interesting because that's interesting. Just reflecting on what you said about art and how it's received. Like the building that Laszlo's designing is on a hill for everyone to see, but later it's an image carousel of him at a gallery, right? It's like his art is being like projected on a wall. It's like, it's interesting. Art being on a hill, alone, isolated, observed, versus amongst other art.
I also, fascism, we haven't really mentioned as well, in the same way that like Van Buren is in many ways a fascist and about his own view on what he's prejudiced and he's bigoted, but he is kind of fascistic in his own kind of messianic, monumental view of what he can deliver for America. And I think the reality is also coming from Europe. They've experienced fascism firsthand, and it's not just also the Holocaust as well, but obviously Erzsébet's still in Hungary where there's been a regime change. And there's still communist dictatorship there, like lingering. Communist, I think, but it's still like that element of dealing with dictatorial, fascistic-like people.
Americans being very inward-looking as well. Like
Yeah.
they don't really engage with the actual world around them and
Yes.
what's happened. It's
And
like
as you
they
say, when
see you there.
Yeah, and parading, as you say, Laszlo as like a story. And it's interesting when Laszlo's at that party, he's telling him about real, trauma that he's been through, but he's seeing the cut glass and the chintzy sort of spectacle of the party.
A wonderful scene when they go to this incredible marble quarry. I think it's the Carrera quarry, where they etch out these gorgeous marble slabs. And there's this wonderful moment where the film slows down and it engages spiritually with the rock itself. And commentary on man harvesting, stone from the earth itself and
baptizing the water, the rock
into the very mountain itself. It's just a visually striking, gorgeous.
It's a bit like that whole quarry sequence is a bit like the Babylon thing. You said that, didn't you? And in a way, Babylon is a lesser film, but you kind of think that this is what Damien Chazelle kind of wanted to have a monumental epic in the same way that Brady Corbett has this. Anyway, we've talked about it at length, but we haven't spoiled anything. It's a great long film. Sink your teeth into it. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Send them in to hello@popkitchenpodcast.com.
Thanks, guys.